But I must start with what's happening in Cuba. The Trump administration is applying incredible pressure on the Cuban regime, cutting off their supply of oil from Venezuela and other countries. And while many in Miami believe this will be the end of the communist dictatorship, it is not clear what will happen next. Add to that the absolutely insane story of what appears to be a group of Miami Cubans who may have decided to mount their own effort to start a revolution, only to be caught by the Cuban Coast Guard, with the Cuban government saying they killed 4 men and captured many others. So what is really happening? I caught up with Frank Mora, who was the U.S. Ambassador to the OAS during the Biden administration, and we started with the news of the shootout in Cuban waters.
Yeah, it increasingly looks like they were either citizens or residents in the United States who maybe, Jim, got caught up in the moment of high expectations that Cuba only needs a little push, a little trigger, a little nudge just to bring an end to communism on the island. And perhaps they got excited by the moment, got armed, 10 or 12 of them, and went to Cuba to liberate the island. This kind of soldier of fortune kind of thing we've seen in the past, but it's been quite a long time. And I think there is that high expectation now that somehow the freedom of Cuba is coming and that the Cuban American community has a role to play in that.
So is the expectation realistic? How do you assess this moment right now in Cuba? Let's put aside the humanitarian aspect for a second, but just politically, how do you see this moment translating in Cuba?
Well, we have to be humble on this. So this is a very complex and uncertain moment. We really haven't seen this in a while, a situation like this where the regime is so weak and so vulnerable. But I keep arguing that, in a sense, the idea that you can strangle an economy and contribute to the humanitarian disaster, which, let's admit, was started by the Cuban regime itself, that somehow would lead to change is unprecedented. Now, I think it's clear from Marco Rubio's statements that he's not seeking regime change in the short term, that what he is seeking is concessions from the regime to embark on a process of economic reform that could ultimately lead to political change. That, to me, sounds like kind of coercive Obama policy 2.0, which the theory of the case with Obama is let's open the island, let's let the private sector flourish, let's engage the island, and the expectation that creates the conditions for change on the island. Well, we're doing the same thing, except that rather than through negotiation like Obama, we're doing it in a coercive way, but also negotiating with the regime to ensure that they embark on this process.
It would seem to me that one thing that the U.S. government would not want is total collapse inside Cuba, because that could lead to unintended results, but foreseeable results of, for instance, perhaps 1,000 ships leaving Miami ports to go pick up relatives, or Cuba itself opening up its ports for another Mariel-style relief. That the United States, I can imagine, really want utter chaos in Cuba. They want a sort of almost like what they're trying to do in Venezuela, correct?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think the administration would like regime change, but would not like a humanitarian collapse on the island, because then it unleashes forces that you don't know where it will go, which is why I think 2 things have happened. One, as I mentioned, Marco Rubio is talking more about pushing the regime to engage in economic reform, not necessarily political reform. And 2, as you know, licenses are being granted for American citizens or for the Cuban private sector now to receive fuel imports, small scale, but to receive fuel imports. That tells me that the administration is concerned that if there is really no oil or no way in which people can move and do their business on the island, that could create a humanitarian disaster. So they're creating those conditions to avoid a humanitarian disaster. And on the Cuban side, I think they're looking at Venezuela and trying to take lessons from that. That is to say, what concessions can we give Washington, perhaps in the economic realm, that will satisfy, please the administration, maybe allow Donald Trump to declare victory while remaining in power. That's the bet I think that they're doing in Venezuela. That might be what they're learning in Cuba about how to proceed with the United States.
And lastly, the big difference between Venezuela and Cuba is there is no opposition movement in reality in Cuba. There is no Maria Corina Machado. There is no history of elections, even fraudulent ones.
That's right. That's right. I mean, if you look at other processes of change, there is an internal process, pressure that is built from within against an authoritarian regime that's pushing the regime to reform, in addition to pressure from outside. There's a lot of pressure from outside, but I don't see the pressure from within. There is no organized opposition. There is no opposition leader. There isn't an internet. People are preoccupied with trying to live in this situation that we're doing. So the internal conditions required for change are not there yet, despite the fact that there's a lot of external pressure being imposed on the island.
And of course, Miami has to sort of temper its expectations in terms of what is coming next.
Yeah, I think that's important that we have to temper those expectations. We have to be humble in our analysis because this is really quite a volatile and uncertain moment, and things can go awry. And I think the administration recognizes that this is not something that's going to happen overnight. This is going to be a long process. There's going to be a lot of frustrations and unmet expectations from folks in South Florida. So we have to be a little patient and be ready to navigate in uncertainty.